Alright, time for another DraftScience video presentation. I believe we're recording. So anyway, I guess we'll start with this EdwardCurrent video, still defending the idea that somehow the Earth is being motivated by the Force, if there is any force or any action, and somehow we're being captured by the gravity of the Earth or something, so we don't really fall to the Earth. Incredibly it's not even a word for this game he's playing with concepts. It's just so bad. I mean, it's not semantics, but it's some kind of just perverse distortion of what words even mean.
Okay, I made several videos about Einstein's description of gravity, and a bunch of people stepped up to defend Isaac Newton and/or to tell me that I suck. But there's
well, it's a little deeper than that, but obviously that's the way you're going to look at it, I suppose. I suppose they're trying to explain to you that what you're doing is just totally destructive to any kind of sensible science, that you're just breaking the concepts altogether, and it's so illogical and so plainly not the right answer. It's not the right way to describe the truth. The truth isn't this stupid.
100 years of experiments showing that gravity isn't really a force.
Okay, now it's just nonsense. There's not 100 years of experiments. There's 2,000 years of experiments. There's 10,000. There's 1,000,000 years of experiments demonstrating that something's going on, that something's moving. There isn't this idiotic idea that nothing's moving, okay? You can play your relativity games and your nonsensical notions, but the truth is the two things converge into each other and the space between them is annihilated. That's a fact. And we know that every other way that that takes place is because something actually moves through space. It displaces its position geometrically in space. It moves to another location, and we can see that it takes time to do that, and that's the whole reason why there is a universe, is because it takes time to move distance. And that is one of the most solid facts there are in physics. And you're trying to say, no, it has nothing to do with it. Distance doesn't have anything to do with it. No, it has everything to do with it.
So today let's clean up some of the finer points of this actually non-existent debate.
Oh no, it's not a non-existent debate. I mean, I can't believe that you sit there and you think you can sell this to rational people. That rational people are going to be this gullible and stupid to just pray at the altar of your mathematics and say, yes, I believe, I believe. And why would they do that except because they want some kind of wacky religious answer? They want some anti-government, anti-establishment answer because, they have. You might as well just say you're the beanie hat people, with the little propellers on your head. You ought to just get a t-shirt. Well, you already have one, okay, where you're not getting it. Okay, that crude crap people drew on walls wasn't the right answer.
Number one, Einstein's theory reduces to Newton's theory when masses and energies are small.
This, more mush about how, okay, well, you can make this generalization and it's not as specific because there isn't enough decimal points, okay? So yes, so you're, but the fundamental premises are completely different in the sense that, I could point out there are some imperfections in Newton's math, in the sense that it's saying it's one force. The moon and the earth, one force. It's not one force. They're both causing effects on each other, just like charges would. They're both doing something. So the inside of the earth, of something the size of the moon inside the earth, actually does move towards the moon every time the moon moves towards the earth. There's an equality there, and the same is true for the sun.
For many applications, Newton is a useful approximation of what gravity does.
Well, okay, again, so it's a useful approximation that's incredibly accurate. Not just a little bit accurate, not just a tiny bit accurate, but incredibly accurate.
If all you're doing is calculating the interaction between the Earth and the Moon at various distances, for example, Newton.
The net interaction. So let's understand it's a net force. Okay, both the objects are considered as one object, as a total amount of mass, and how much energy, so to speak, how much displacement does that total amount of mass represent as a force. It doesn't really explain the fact that what's really doing is the two things are actually moving. If I had two equal objects, two moons that were identical in their mass, you'd end up with a formula that just says, okay, well, if they have this much distance, there's going to be this much energy for them to move this close to each other, but you're not going to say this one's going to move all the distance and this one's going to move no distance. And the reason why we have that perception is because the other objects are usually so disproportional in their masses.
We'll do just fine. You get into trouble with things like Mercury's orbit, though, because it's so close to the sun.
Right, so you get into trouble in the sense that the only trouble you'll get into is if you don't recognize that the center of gravity of the sun, okay, the center of its mass, is moving. So if you don't know that the sun's interior is processing, okay, because you can't see it processing, right? You know, the interior of the Earth, a molten blob, could have a precession to it. That is, there could be more heavy metals at one end and lighter materials at the other end as it swirls inside the Earth. That would be a precession of its center of gravity. And the same is true of the sun. The sun is moving towards all of the planets an equal amount to the amount they're moving towards it. And as the sun does that and also the planets orbit, there's imbalances created, and over time it creates its own resident wobble that's inside of the sun. Right now the sun's wobbling. Now we don't see the sun moving in space because the wobble is happening to the heavy stuff on the center of the sun. And that's all Einstein's equation is attempting in some way to represent with a hugely convoluted and insanely impossible to resolve equation, right? Nobody does Einstein's gravity for Mercury equation. There's not some website that shows it, you know, somebody doesn't make a 5-minute video showing you how to calculate it because it's insanely complicated. And let's understand, Einstein didn't find the equation and it predicted Mercury. That's not what happened. Einstein was told, here's the precession of Mercury. Make your theory fit the evidence. And so he made equations. So with Max Planck, he spent a couple of few months, whatever, 6 months, convoluting an equation that would explain Mercury and leave everybody else out. See, I mean, the obvious fact is if, well, I could draw it, but you should be able to get this. Right, if the sun's precessing a little bit, wobbling, the only planet that's really going to notice is the closest ones. The ones that are further away, the wobble becomes irrelevant. Just like if I move a light and you're far away, you're not going to see that I'm moving the light. But the closer you get, the more you can see the light's moving. Same theory. And so, yes, all the other planets are not affected by the precession because it's such a tiny bit of change from their long distance perception. They can't see the change. It's too infinitesimally small. But something really close sees the change. So Mercury is stuck processing because the sun is processing.
For that, you need
Simple answer. Instead of this wacky crap.
Einstein's theory to correctly predict what gravity will do and how.
So again, it doesn't predict how at all. It doesn't even touch the subject of how at all. There's absolutely no mechanism defining why Mercury moves towards the sun or the Earth moves towards. No physical mechanism, no source of energy whatsoever. They'll concede that it's moving the speed of light, whatever the carrier of the energy is, but they won't concede it exists because they can't explain how it works, because they have no clue how something shooting from the sun to the Earth tells the Earth, come to me. How a force radiated by the sun could possibly create the inverse reaction of moving towards. How you could shoot a bullet at somebody and they fly into you.
Number 2. Gravity is often called one of the 4 fundamental forces. But that's a loose traditional term.
Right, a loose traditional term based on the fact that all these forces, the things we're going to call a force, seem to have something in common, which was the speed of light. That's why they're all called forces. And they're all called forces because they are, in fact, invisible things that happen, right? Magnets move into each other. Charge makes little paper balls fly all over the place. Stuff moves, okay, by something that we can't see. And all of those things have one thing in common, which is they all transmit this message at the same exact speed, which should be a huge giveaway that they're all the same exact thing. And we decide to call that a force. And all of these forces seem to do one thing. They move the same frickin' speed. A huge giveaway.
When physicists are speaking rigorously, they usually call them the four fundamental interactions, in part because modern physics no longer considers gravity to be a force.
Right, so it's an interaction with nothing, though. It's an interaction with ESP that moves at the speed of light. So their ESP is really slow. So if I had real ESP, their philosophy or theory would be that my ESP, if I want to have ESP with somebody who was like on Pluto or something, oh, it would take 15 minutes for me to ESP my ESP to them.
From the standpoint of particle physics, gravity remains unexplained.
You don't have any particle physics. All you have is your wave physics. You've turned everything into a non-existent thing. And then your universal field theory is so stupid because what you're basically saying is, let's ignore the real sources. So there's a bunch of headlights out there. Let's ignore the headlights. They're pointing right at us. The cars are looking right at us, shining their headlights on us. Let's ignore that. And let's see how much light is hitting 10 feet around me. Okay? And then I'll say the force exists 10 feet around me. And I'll just ignore the sources. I'll ignore the actual causes of the photons getting to me, and I'll pretend it just happens in space. The space just happens to have light in it. It doesn't have to come from something. I mean, it's silly physics.
It's kind of messed up. But one day, it'll all get worked out.
So yeah, one day it'll all get worked out. So we'll admit it doesn't work. But we'll just pretend it works and it's the right answer. Even though it doesn't work, and we'll just pretend, we'll just talk about the future where people have to go through this stupid process of having these stupid arguments with you people who are just too frickin' silly, and explain you went way too silly. You went way off the reservation. You've left the building. You've done all of those things. You've jumped the shark, and you're not paying any attention. But that's when the physics will get fixed, is when you admit it's not right.
Number 3, gravity looks like a force that accelerates things from the perspective of the ground.
No, from every perspective in the universe, because there's only one universe, and and everything has to sit in it, and everything isn't in superpositions. I'm not on Venus, I'm not on Pluto, I'm not everywhere in the universe right now. That is just a pile of crap. All right, everything does have a position and has to move from one position to another position, and that requires a real event to take place, a real interaction with a real thing, not an interaction with nothing.
But modern physics defines this as an accelerated reference frame, and the laws of physics are written down as they operate in inertial reference frames.
Yeah, there's no such thing as any frickin' frame. You either are moving or you're not moving, and somebody else can be moving with you. All right, you're not in a frame now. You're not in some special universe because, oh, we're both walking to the retarded class on how to, properly clean the crud between your toes. So we both have our retard hats on and we have something in common. So what? You're not in a special retard frame, okay? There's no yellow bus that you jump into and now you're in a special bus and all the rules are new and you have new special rules. No such thing exists. There's no such stupid idiotic frames. All there is you can have things in common, and the fact that you have some things in common means other things will be relative to your commonness, and that's all. Doesn't mean anything changed physically. Everything is exactly the same physically. You're still in the three-dimensional universe at real distances between things, and light is always going to do exactly the same thing because light doesn't care about what you were doing. It's not interested in your little theories.
Because that's where the laws take their simplest forms.
No, the laws take their simplest form in the sense that Einstein had it right, in the sense that light is your guide. Let light be your guide. All right, so he got that little bit of this story correct. Okay, light doesn't care about your crap. It has its absolute frame. It does an absolute thing everywhere, the same in the universe. It never changes its speed. It never does anything different. And you're just playing, again, semantics games trying to invert everything.
In inertial reference frames, does a nearby beam of light travel in a straight line?
Okay, so we know that the light doesn't bend, so you keep pretending it does. No, Einstein is so clearly pointing out the spaceship walls move. The light doesn't bend, so there's no bending here to figure out. We know the giant flame coming out of the spaceship is pushing the walls of the spaceship. We know exactly what part of the thing is changing. What's the change in the environment that's causing two things to move, create distance between them? The change in the environment is the giant flame. Now everything else, we don't know what the preconditions were. Doesn't matter what the preconditions are. We know what the giant flame is doing, and that's the one creating the difference between the hand and the apple. If I'm standing in the spaceship, that's the thing that's going to make the difference. The apple isn't going to go anywhere. The spaceship is going to go somewhere. The light doesn't go somewhere. The spaceship goes somewhere. And the same is true on Earth, and the same exactly inverse. The Earth isn't going anywhere. The thing is being pushed into the Earth. Now, in this case, on Earth, the apple does fall because the apple is being pushed. There's no flame pushing the Earth up. Oh, man, this is pathetically stupid.
Line, for example. And in that context, no force makes an apple fall to the ground. Now this is
Yeah, in that context, in this idiotic context, there's a giant flame somewhere pushing the Earth towards me, and at the bottom and on the other side of the Earth, there's a giant flame right here somehow pushing the Earth towards the Chinaman. No, none of that's happening. That's preposterously stupid. We know the force is acting on me, and it's acting on me based on how dense I am, how many atoms I have, because it's a nuclear force.
an important one. It isn't just a matter of perspective, because one perspective is objectively superior to the other one.
Right, and the rational perspective, okay, the one that obeys some certain logical rules. Like again, making a comparison be something on Earth and then a spaceship that has a flame coming out of its tail. Okay, that's a ludicrous comparison. All right, when you're not going to sit there and even try to figure out that, well, yeah, the flame's really coming out of us in the sense that we know that gravity is behaving just like a little motor and it's going to accelerate things towards other objects. And we know that in this equation where I'm competing with the Earth, we know in that competition the amount of me moving, right? Me moving, a mass equal to myself moving towards me in the Earth. Like if a big pile of 150 pounds of molten crap in the Earth moves towards me, we know, okay, that's a tiny, tiny effect, and we're not going to see the Earth move. That's not going to happen on a giant, huge Earth. We're not going to see 100 pounds of it changed its center of gravity by 100 pounds. We know that's going to be imperceptible. It's not going to be anything at all. But we know the force acting on me is going to be perceptible. Oh, you're just pathetic.
Number 4, gravity can do work, and work is defined as a force that's applied across a distance.
Well, yes, exactly, because the universe is full of it. Force. That's right, it's a push universe. Unlike your delusions, there's real things, there's real pressure in the universe. That's why everything tends to clump. It's because there's actual pressure in the universe pushing it into each other. It's not pull. There's no pull. So why don't you describe some of these fancy pull mechanisms, these elemental pulls? Why don't you even show me in the real world we live in where there's a real pull, where something really pulls on something?
Newtonian terms, a bicycle on a hill has stored potential energy, which manifests as kinetic energy.
So again, this is all more jargon, right? There is no, if you want to be rigorous about it, as he uses these words, if you want to do real physics, you know that there's no such thing as stored energy in the thing. There's just a relative position change. Again, the apple in the spaceship isn't doing anything. It's sitting there, okay? Once you establish its velocity with the spaceship, it's perfectly comfortable. And if you keep accelerating the spaceship and let go of the apple, well, now you're not connected to the apple anymore. You're not forcing it to accelerate anymore. So it's not accelerating anymore. You accelerate, the apple doesn't accelerate. Now, it's not because the apple has any potential energy in it. It just has potential relative to the fact that you have a moving spaceship. So where's the energy really? Oh, that's right, that big giant flame again. That's where the energy is.
When gravity does work on the bike to bring it downhill. Stored potential energy actually isn't a thing in Einstein's theory.
Yes, exactly. It's not an irrational theory. The idea of potential energy is just potential to an environment, okay, in an environment, but it doesn't tell you which thing has the energy. It's always going to be an interaction that you're testing it with. So yes, everything is tested through an interaction, but you can't tell just looking at the circumstance and say which one has the energy without some knowledge of all of their conditional circumstances.
So if you're building a hydroelectric dam, it isn't going to help you. In that context, you can go ahead and consider gravity to be a...
Circumstances have potential, okay? Not you can, and yes, one of the things has the potential, but you can't tell just by looking at it. You have to know more about it.
Force that does work, and you'll make useful calculations. Number 5, there is a Newtonian interpretation.
So more of this crap that you'll make useful calculations. Calculations you could do the old way just as well. And again, if you do it the old way, recognizing the fact that the sun isn't in the center of the sun's gravity is not in one location. It's moving.
Of that demo where I dropped the accelerometer and it reads 0 as it's falling.
Right, which was totally bogus, because that's, of course, that's what it's going to do, because you have your whole test instrument inside the box you're moving. So how can the whole test instrument know something when there's no relative comparison as far as it's concerned? You have to have the test instrument has to be outside the experiment. It can't be in the experiment.
Consider a simplified accelerometer modeled as 2 different masses attached by a spring. If we apply a force to the larger mass, the system is accelerated, and the smaller mass drags behind inertially.
They're in different test frames.
Now let's give the whole thing a uniform electric charge, and let's bring in a wall that carries the opposite charge. What'll happen? The accelerometer will accelerate toward the wall. But since all of its components are being acted on uniformly,
yes,
there's no acceleration.
They're all in the experiment.
Finally, it hits something and stops. Now, it does register an acceleration, even though it's no longer accelerating. The accelerometer free-falling in a gravitational field that...
Right, is it just it's a silly way to say which one is being acted on by a force, because the two aren't interacting. You can only measure an effect when you have an interaction. You said it before, these are interaction things, or whatever you called it. You said, we're not going to call it forces, we're going to call it interaction something. You have to have the interaction. You can't detect it without the interaction.
That's the same thing. When it's falling, no acceleration reading. But if it's held in place, yes, acceleration reading. So if you want to be Newtonian about things, you can think of mass as being like the charge of gravity, which acts on every atom uniformly, and it tracks everything to the ground the same.
Exactly. It's an external pressure, okay, that affects things based on their mass, based on how many little bits they have inside of them to hit. So it'll hit a feather or a pea a lot less than it's going to hit a cannonball, because there's more things to hit. So the exact number of hits is exactly proportional to how much mass it has.
Just as it does in the charged accelerometer case.
It absorbs exactly the same amount of force proportional to its mass. So each little bit absorbs exactly the same amount of force. So the more bits, the more force you're consuming.
To be clear, though, this is not an inertial reference frame. A beam of light would curve in this frame.
So again, more statements about beams of light never curve, okay, ever. They can just appear to be, your view of it gets distorted because you're moving the target you're looking at the beam with, right? You move the target. Oh, no surprise. I want to paint something, and I paint on a board that's moving, and I'm not going to get an image, right? It's going to be all over the place. I'm not going to be able to paint on it, right? So, duh. So light never bends. There's no evidence that light bends. Einstein's silly comparison was just that, silly. He should have known. The light's not bending. there's no reason to make light look like that on Earth because it didn't really bend. The spaceship moved away from it. The canvas moved away from the light. Besides the fact that also the emitter is moving, which is a huge problem because if you understand that photons are long things, they're rays of something, they have quanta in them, numerous quantas make a photon. Well, then each quanta is now going to be way the hell out of alignment. The polarization of the light beam is going to be 675 miles. You're not going to be able to see any of it as a photon anymore because you're not even shooting the photon as a beam of light anymore because you're moving it as you're shooting it, which means all of the bullets aren't in a row anymore. Durr.
So it violates number 3. It's an imperfect analogy with highly contrived conditions, but it's still a pretty cool thought experiment.
No, it isn't. It's a nonsensical, silly thing you did just to sit there and like I got you kind of bullshit. Oh, look at this great experiment. It proves it. No, it didn't prove anything. And you got caught proving nothing with a useless experiment.
So is gravity a force? No.
Yes, of course it is. Of course it's a force, of course. Okay. Are you an idiot? Yes!
No! Even though I would never say that Newton was wrong, he was definitely wronger compared to Einstein.
Okay, so another silly thing to say. Again, Einstein's theory, he took the inverse square law and drew it, which was really not a very sophisticated thing to say, and said, there, that's what makes gravity, the curve in the line, see? The inverse square law is a curved line, so there I make a curved line. That's like a well you fall into, see? There, that's how gravity works. It's not a theory.
Einstein's theory is just quantitatively much more accurate.
So again, they keep saying it is, but no one can even do the stupid equation, right? And again, it's a contrived pile of math. And all, there's many arguments. I've seen them by people who actually try to do this stupid math. And they're basically saying exactly what I just said, that what Einstein's accounting for is the motion of the center of the sun's mass.
And it's more generally applicable. It applies to inertial reference frames, accelerated reference frames, and even...
Right, well, again, there are no frames anywhere. There's just objects that are moving, and they can be moving in the same direction, and that means they have a common experience. That's all there is. There's only relativity as an add-on, okay, to the fact that everything does have an absolute position in space, and they're changing their absolute position moment to moment in a real universe by real laws.
Rotating reference frames. It led to the prediction of black holes and gravitational...
So more nonsense. It's nothing to do with black holes, but so as a prediction. Again, something not really predicted because you never really found one, okay? You have no real proof that there's anything else but heavy objects with heavy mass. Not anything called a black hole or a singularity or any of that crap. And you certainly haven't found any of your little micro ones, have you? Your little micro black holes. Okay, gravitational waves. So let's understand Einstein said about gravitational waves, no chance in seeing it, and all Einstein said about it is the same thing I'm saying right now, right? Is that, you can understand that a system that's moving, that's, why can't I never remember the word for that? That has two objects in it that are rotating around each other. Okay, that's how like most galaxies were formed and all that stuff. It had, it's gone. I just can't find the word. Anyway, that system will have two states, right? When the two objects are here and here, and when the objects are here and here. And obviously, as you're looking at that state, the spread one has a weaker gravitational profile than the one where the two things are in line with each other. All right, just because of the spread. These lines add up to a longer line, a longer distance than these two lines. These two lines are shorter distance than these two lines. And so you have a tiny change in the gravitational profile when things are lined up this way versus being this way when you're looking at them. You can sort of see that with lights, right? If I put two lights right next to each other versus two lights a distance apart from each other, one is going to be more bright for you personally up close than the others. So there would be some gravitational difference in a by whatever system. And yeah, but it's so infinitesimal you never see it. Einstein said that, so let's just pretend he didn't say it. Just pretend that Einstein somehow would have jumped right on board and gone with all this crap. It's just like the Schrodinger equation and everything else. They never point out that Schrodinger is the guy who came up with the Schrodinger cat thing to mock your physics. Not because he agreed with you people. He disagreed with you people.
Waves. Special and general relativity both have to be programmed into the GPS in order to keep the satellites and the...
So again, no, they discovered that the clocks aren't synchronized, okay, and they can compensate with it just by adjusting it until it's correct. So they don't do Einstein's math to do any of that. They adjust it as necessary. So again, this is just more crap that we couldn't function without Einstein's. Of course we could. We could see that the clocks aren't in sync, and we could put them in sync. No big deal. But again, they don't have a theory for why clocks do this thing, why clocks break with velocity. Their theory sucks in the sense they don't have any explanation, and it's just connected to velocity. And you can tell that if you have any brains at all, you can figure out that if gravity is pushing me into the earth all the time and the earth is pushing me back all the time, then I'm basically bouncing on the surface of the earth. And that something bouncing in heavy gravity is going to bounce more than stuff way up in space bouncing a lot less. So I'm actually moving faster than the satellites in space because I'm bouncing as I'm moving. Simple explanation, they're done.
ground clocks in sync. If all we had was Newton, your phone wouldn't be able to tell you where you're...
Yeah, well, you don't have to stop at Newton. You can just rationally jump a little bit further and do a couple of little sensible things, like recognize that, well, yes, Newton theory is taking two objects and turning it into one object, which probably isn't a great idea. So yes, there should be some acknowledgement that the gravity is bisected. There's two forces, one thing acting on the other thing acting on the other thing. It's not just one force.
houses when you're drunk. The Newtonian view is basically gravity is a force that's everywhere, but it's invisible. It works in mysterious ways.
Yes, so are most of the photons in the universe. So again, the invisibility is no big surprise. We see invisible stuff all the time in the sense we know it's there, we can't see it. I know there's microwaves flying in front of me. I know there's all kinds of stuff. So why would I be surprised that, yes, there's lots of invisible force in the universe? We know those microwaves are real forces, right? You're not going to say they don't move things when they hit it. You know they do. If I hit something with enough of them, it's going to move. You know that's true.
And it cannot be tested with an accelerometer that's falling. But it loves you. Since it's so much more accurate and generalized, I got a sneaking suspicion that Einstein's description is at least closer to how the universe...
You have a sneaking suspicion, and I have a huge suspicion that you've jumped the shark, you've jumped the evidence. The evidence doesn't indicate any reason to be at all confident in any of these silly theories of entanglement, many universes, all this preposterous nonsense that you guys have made up. You have very little evidence. Yes, the evidence is scant, and we have to be careful about how we interpret it. We have only half a fingerprints, and we got to sort of like a little bit of DNA and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you got to be more careful, and you just have no interest in being cautious at all.
Actually works at a fundamental level than Newton's is. Look at it this way.
This isn't a contest between Newton and Einstein. It's a contest between science before Newton, at Newton's time, versus your science, which is all hype and propaganda. Again, like the Young experiment. Everything in the Young experiment had already been exposed by Newton. He'd already done the inside the slit thing, and he'd already done the outside slit thing. He'd already found what the phenomenon was, and then you people are all surprised that 100 years later somebody points out, hey, this stuff happens. It's called Newton's rings. He's famous for it, and you're all of a sudden saying, look, light diffracts. How bizarre. Your science is silly. And then 100 years after that, you just start making up all this wooey crap. Einstein does the Schrodinger argument. He points out to you how your arguments are silly. And what's your reply? Too bad, we like it. You didn't rationally explain how this crap makes any sense. The superimposed, the cat's alive and dead. What a pile of crap.
When we were kids, It was fine to believe in the Santa Claus approximation of where presents came from, or the man and a woman sharing a special hug approximation of baby making.
Right, so you're just pointing out exactly what you people are doing. You're just taking advantage of a bunch of gullible idiots who will fall for any kind of silly story because they have so little knowledge of the actual experiments and the actual evidence and how thin the evidence is and how there's a ton of better explanations, but you're just totally uninterested in any conversation about some other explanation. You just don't want to hear it.
But we're adults now.
Not you.
The conversation is about how the universe actually operates, at least according to the best theories we have.
Yes, according to the one you've chosen, what you Catholics have chosen. You've chosen the best. Jesus is the best superhero. He's the best. Mohammed was a scumbag, child molesting stinker. Don't go with that tree god. He's bullshit. No, go with my special Jeebus. That's all you're doing, you propagandist.
I think we can do away with the approximations.
Again, it's not an approximation. It's a pretty complete necessity. It's got, like I said, Newton's formula has everything in it except acknowledgement that the sun moves. You don't, the inside of the sun is moving. All right. So, that wasn't much fun. So let's do some Bill Gates because he's an idiot too. Alright, so this is light, and it's just, again, the least these dissidents could do, is be a little bit, have enough integrity to at least acknowledge that, when they're picking on some conventional notion, that they pick on it by being at least honest about what they're saying. And he can't manage that. I mean, he did physics. He was a real physicist. And, he sits there and can't even recite their jargon correctly.
We use silicon underneath the silicon dioxide. Hits the silicon, bounces back up through the layer, always slow through the layer, and then moves fast again. Well, why did it move fast again?
So he's doing this idiotic thing, like somehow because light takes longer to get through certain substances, that the light in fact slowed down. All right, and there's lots of physical explanations. I mean, if you believe in electrons and you believe in protons and atoms, well, you can figure out that, even with something like sound is going to require you to move the whole complex. Like the atom has a whole bunch of these electrons and protons and stuff in here, and you have to move, you have to take all of those elements, every one of those elements, and move them to a new location. And that's going to take energy, and it's going to take time, because you're going to have to, move them all little bits at a time, blah, 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 and they move much slower than the speed of light, so, it's going to be a lot slower. So it takes time to move whole atoms. Well, it takes time to move electrons and protons. So if you're a piece of energy coming in, a photon that could be made of little bits, by my theory, just little clumps of stuff, and one of those clumps hits here, and it moves the electron from this position to, say, this position, or more likely, some distorted position, but, in glass, let's just say the geometry is really clean, so the electron moves straight. Okay, so the electron goes from this position to this position. So the photon hits going C. This is going to be much, much slower than C. Okay, so this is the part that's now time is being consumed here. It's going much slower to get to this position. And when it gets to this position, then it's going to send its little photon bit to the next electron and do the same thing all over again. So the electrons are going to keep being pushed to a new position. Okay, and each time they're being pushed, there's a big slowdown. Time is being consumed, and we're not getting much mileage. So we go from going in the speedy car, and then we jump in the Model A and go clunk, 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 clunk. And then we get back in the speed car, and then we go clunk, 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 clunk. So the light doesn't slow down. Okay, it's moving electrons. That's something you should understand. That's the theory. Their theory is that when light photons hit electrons, they move the electrons. And the electrons don't move at the speed of C. They move something less than C. And it's that much lessness, okay, that is consuming the time it takes for the signal, the light hit over here at one time, and it's going to arrive over here at a much slower, time, plus way too much. Okay, 40% too much. And it's going to be 40% too much because it spent a lot of time in the Model T, and that slowed it down. There's the simple explanation, Bill. So why are you arguing they don't have an argument? And they have variations on this argument, but I'm just saying that's it. They're explained. There's no light speeds up. Okay, there's you push a force through something, and then the force is going on that last little bit. When that last electron goes out, well, when it goes back in again, that's when the new photon is released at the speed of light. But there's no lack of continuity in this explanation. It explains the phenomenon.
Speeded it up. Where did it get its energy?
So again, they don't claim it gets energy. They're claiming it's losing time by being in the medium. The medium isn't a straight path. The photon doesn't go through the piece of glass. It's transmitted through the electrons in the glass. The glass is a heavy, dense thing. It doesn't just go through it like it was tissue paper or something and it missed all of the atoms. There's no argument that transparent things are transparent because photons go through them. Now, there are cases like that. Like I said, I could take a piece of toilet paper and you could probably see me through it to some extent because the photons will actually miss all the atoms.
To go faster. And they cannot explain that.
Yes, they can. So, this is just, why are you making an argument that's just so silly? They have an explanation. And again, the explanation doesn't have anything to do with light slowing down.
I explain with particles. And here's an image of that so that you can see visually what I'm talking about. See if I can get it here. Okay. This is what they have in mind. You have a layer of silicon, which is the gray part at the bottom. You have silicon dioxide, which has been grown on that film. Okay, it's a very thin film, and you're going to try to measure the thickness of that film. We use an ellipsometer, but you don't need to know any of that. All you need to know is that
there's lots of different ways to measure the thickness based on breaking the photons at the surface and then remaking them in another location. But that's that theory. But the fact that the photons take longer to get through the medium, like I said, they have all kinds of explanations that are perfectly reasonable based on their theory. So this pretense that this is a question they haven't dealt with is just kind of nonsense.
We shine light on the surface of that glass, that upper part is glass, right? They say that the angle changes. The angle of the particles or waves going in there changes. And then when it comes out, as you can see, it goes slowly through the glass.
Yes, because it interacts with electrons. So again, it's just, but anyway, it's just bogus. This is, whatever, too stupid. So we'll do some comments. And, I was going to do the double slit thing. Yeah. Boy, this video is going to end up being a little longer than anticipated, but good for you. Lots of good subjects. All right. So I think I can make this semi-concise as an explanation. So the slit diffraction patterns. So you have two modes. You have, you can see that. Slits close together, slits far apart. And the trick is it's all about electrons and how much tension they're under. So when the slits are far apart, the electrons are unharassed. They're not pushing on each other, so they're closer to each other, and they're less energetic because they're not being harassed by each other in any way. So when the light comes through, some beams might not hit any electrons. 0 electrons go right to the center. And some beams might hit 1 electron. Okay, so if they hit 1 electron, they're going to get deflected a little. They might be deflected this way, they might be deflected that way. But it doesn't matter. Be a certain amount of deflection. Deflection is going to be because the electrons are in alignment. And when you try to push one of them into the other one, it either goes this way or it goes this way. Right? You can sort of understand that. It doesn't go straight. And so when it readmits the photon, it readmits it from an angle. And the angle will be based on how far over this side it was of the electron or this side. So there'll be a path that will be, say, this much of a piece of pie that one electron will create. So if you hit one electron, your beam, your photon will end up being somewhere in here. Now if you hit two electrons, that's going to be twice as many interactions. Now you could hit one going this way and then one going this way, and that takes you back to the middle again. Alright, but let's just say you hit one going left and then you hit another one going left, and so now you went even further left. So now if you hit two electrons, you'll be somewhere in this pie. You hit three electrons, you'll be somewhere in this pie. 4 electrons, and so on. You can get the message, right? You know, that depending on how many electrons you hit will cause you to be deflected more and more and more. And that can happen going crosswise also. So understand, it can deflect off this electron, hit over here, then hit over here, and so there can be different ways that it gets to one of these locations, but the idea is you get more and more bending the more electrons you hit. And each electron has a certain amount of pressure. So somewhere between, you know, whatever, you know, so much deflection. Again, so if you were hitting something like a steel ball and you hit it with a P, you can understand that if you hit it with the P this way, you know, it's going to be more deflection. Then the further out you go, the more deflection you're going to get. You know, the closer in, the more deflection. The further out, the less deflection. You know, just like gravity. And so that's going to mean that it's a little bit variable about, you know, where exactly it goes. It doesn't go to precisely one location a little bit. Okay, and then when they bring the slits closer together, now you're reducing the number of electrons. Electrons are now being energized, being pushed on each other. And now they're spreading. They're going further away because they got to get away from each other. So now they're spreading out, and they're also further away from each other, and they're under higher pressure. So now there's fewer electrons to hit. The tighter you make the slit, the fewer of these arcs you're going to get. And the arcs are going to get much bigger because the electrons are under higher pressure. So the arcs get much bigger, and that's your single slit pattern that gets very big. Okay, so that's this blobby one. So the tighter I make the slit, the fewer electrons I potentially hit, but the ones I hit bend me more. Okay, because they're under higher pressure. So I hit fewer, but I get bent more. I hit more, but I get bent less the wider you make the slit. And then where you see the light just has to do again with putting the phase back together again. So if you're using white light, then the red ones could be put back together here because the phase, the difference in the path, just the same standard geometry. You're just going to take a bit here from here and a bit from, say, here, and say where those two combine. You know, a photon that went in here and bent, and a photon that went in here and hit an electron. Those two distances, this extra distance will be the distance of the wavelength, and so you'll see the photon rebuilt there. And that'll be for the blue light, and then the red light will be over here because the wavelength is longer, so the path difference has to be greater for you to see a red photon. But there's photons hitting all these places. Broken ones are hitting all these places. They just can't be reconstructed into a proper phase relationship to create a photon at a frequency. Photons are red, blue, and green or whatever, and you can't make those again because there's not a path that works. The path length differences don't work for those locations to put them back in phase again. Alright, so that's the brief. But it perfectly works as a theory, explains the experimental results, and there's not a bit of woo in it, not a bit of any magical forces, just the basic quantum electrodynamics, the basic relationship between the quanta hitting an electron, the quanta of the photon hitting an electron and moving it. And the fact is that the photon isn't made of just one quanta, it's made of numerous quantas, okay, in a stream, and it's called a ray of light. Okay, and the ray of light has a thickness, and that's its polarization. It all fits. Alright, comments. Alright, Michael Falwell. Hi, Gary. That free energy guy has been harping on about the earth-shattering breakthrough for the last 5 years. Yeah, well, it's like all the free energy guys, and like I said, you have a certain sympathy, but there is a certain dishonesty to it all, right? My last video. Well, why is it your last video? In the video, he's conceding, I'm reaching hundreds of thousands of people. That's not good enough. you know, Pathetic whine. So anyway, I won't read the rest of it, but yes, it's just all these people and their government conspiracy bullshit. All right, man from the Taliban. Absolutely obnoxious screen name, right? I mean, and his obnoxious, stupid, idiotic image. So what are you? No, you're a troll is what you are. Man trolling the internet. Idiot. Waste of time. Jackass. Can't even capitalize the first letter of a paragraph. Why don't you just admit you don't know what you're talking about? Because that would be a lie, asshole. I clearly do know what I'm talking about. I've done the research. Let's see you beat me, okay? Why don't you show up in the room here? Why don't we have a conversation? You show me how you know a damn fucking thing about physics. All you know is what they told you. You don't know any of the details. You don't know the experiments. You don't know the facts. And somebody can interrogate you a tiny bit and find out you don't know the facts. Why don't you answer some of my questions, jackass? Why is the photon experiment? Why doesn't the math? Why isn't the experiment invisible photons demonstrate the math to be true by having gradual on-off? Why does it look like a block of light, a block of light, a block of light? It shouldn't look like that, jackass. Why the discrepancy? Why are there two patterns in the two-slit experiment? What's your theory of wave interference that creates two patterns? Do you have any? No, you don't have any answers to any of the fucking goddamn questions. You just you spout your shit, your dishonest fucking bullshit, and you don't have any answers to any questions at all. You have no knowledge on this subject. You're just talking out of your fucking dirty, smelly ass. I heard you say that the Standard Model doesn't explain anything. I pointed out how the Standard Model has no energy in it for two of the most fundamental forces in the universe, gravity and magnetism. They have no conception of the cause at all. Bent space makes it happen. That's good enough for you? Virtual photon. That's a good enough explanation. Well, to me, that's less than God. That's just saying amorphous power being. What is that? I mean, it's more pathetic than a religion because there's absolutely no details at all. They don't even have a heaven and a hell. They don't have any construct at all. They just say, him who is him says so. That's all they got. All right. All right. Anyway, but it totally does. Totally, because I say so. Not because I can prove it or show you any evidence demonstrating it. Okay, if you learn it. So it's just more crap. Yeah, where? Where do I go learn it? Why don't you link me to the video telling the truth so I can go rip it a new asshole, because I will. Alright, the wave-like nature of quantum particles, whatever that means. The wave-like nature. I've already demonstrated how it's not a wave. I point out the radar experiment in that video he's responding to, right? I think the radar experiment's in there. You people are pathetic. Literally predicts. It doesn't predict anything. Oh, God. Like a single and double slit patterns. Yes, they are different, and QM predicts both. Well, you can't predict both with the same equation. You can't use the same equation and say this equation is the answer to it all. It's the wonderful piece of mathematics, and then explain two entirely different patterns. That's retarded, fella. Okay, if you try to use the same, that's like putting whatever, the triangle peg in the round hole and the square hole, and then saying, see, they fit equally badly. Oh, God. Okay, the transistors in your some more crap about how QM invented the transistor. What a pile of shit. Einstein already had one, essentially, right? The photoelectric effect was the transistor. They just hadn't perfected it yet. Alright, which allows electrons to flow one way but not the other. Well, that's not a transistor, frankly. That's a diode, retard. Okay, as well as a million other things you're too lazy to learn about. Yeah, let's interrogate you on what you fucking goddamn know. I was doing electronics, right, probably 30 years before you were an egg. You can call it woo, but anybody can do that. No, I didn't call it woo for no reason. I explained why it's woo, because it provides absolutely vacuous mush as an answer. Virtual photon is woo. Okay, in truth is you are trying to reduce physics to classical particle interactions. Yes, and it works. That's the whole point. I'm showing you how the particle mechanism can explain the experiments. It works, and it's really simple, and there's no ESP, and there's no superposition. Things aren't confused about where they are at all. There's actually a photon that goes near the edge of the slit, and there's a photon that goes through the middle of the slit, and there's photons that go in all specific locations. They don't go anywhere and then randomly become a specialton and do a special thing in some random way. There's no random, jackass. Oh, God, you people are so fucking dumb. What I mean, dumb in the sense that you're too stupid to know you're the one who hasn't researched any of this. You're the one with the big giant vacuum as a knowledge base. Okay, where particles carry momentum, move in a straight line, and only experience force when another object runs into it. Yes, that's right. That's the universe, jackass. Real stuff, really moving, and moving real distances in real time. That's what the real universe is. It isn't any of this superimposed bullshit. Okay, but you're forgetting that thousands of years ago, these classical notions, so they didn't know any of this 1,000 years ago, so more bullshit. Were as foreign and unintuitive as bent space is today. So the more of these people who think the truth is going to keep morphing into something, like evolution isn't the answer. No, it's going to be special, qualified, enhanced, extra special quantum evolution. No, it isn't, a jackass. It's the right answer. And a guy 350 years ago had the right answer about gravity. It's a push force. The universe is under pressure. That's why things move into each other. Idiot. Okay, classical notions were you contribute nothing to the science of physics except honesty and decency and integrity and evidence. Okay, and everyone stands only to lose IQ points by choosing to listen to you. Well, if you mean lose IQ points, like IQ is something like idiot quotient. Idiot. Yes. I award you no points. Yes, like I'm really impressed by your opinion. You can't even call yourself something reasonable on the internet. You can't even figure that part out. Okay, and may God have mercy on your soul. So you're a God botherer. Oh, see, and you love science, though. You're a God botherer who loves science. Well, may you get what you fucking deserve, okay? I hope, I wish, it would be my dearest desire if I could actually talk to a God and make deals. I'd certainly say, well, look, God, you can you can cut my arm off as long as you fuck that guy good. All right, take your biggest dildo and fuck the fuck out of that jackass. Okay, and just say my name as you're doing it. Just drive it right home for him that this is what you get for being an asshole. Asshole. That would be so cool. Oh, I almost have wet dreams about that. All right. Okay, and may God have mercy on your soul. Oh, he says, yeah. Oh yeah, it's a Billy Mason reference. I do like the movie reference. So he thinks "May God have mercy on your soul" is a movie reference. Oh yeah, I'm sure everybody got that. Yeah. Okay, so why are you wasting time on this troll? You're trying to refry probability and assert that chance is fundamental thing in the universe. I don't know if he's even trying to do that. I don't even think he understands enough about their theory to even know that that's what they're doing, that they're basically saying the dice are superimposed. I threw the dice onto the dice table and they superimpose, and then they do some calculus and they do all kinds of fancy stuff, and then they decide to show boxcars. Ooh, magic. Okay, it isn't QM, it's an idealization. It doesn't explain anything. Look, the point is it doesn't have energy, okay? There's no energy in quantum mechanics. There's no energy in bent space. They're silly theories on their face because they lack the thing called energy. Movement doesn't happen without it. Energy is evidence of the existence of some force that changes something, that imbalances it. You create imbalance by injecting force. You create imbalance by adding heat to a system, by adding photons. You imbalance the system. Imbalance is the evidence of fucking energy. That's its profile. That's what it leaves. That's the fingerprint energy leaves behind, is imbalance, or vice versa. You want to know what caused energy? Something to look energetic? It's because something imbalanced it. Alright. Well, that was 41-ish minutes wasted. So this is this logical troglodyte. So isn't that another stupid ass bullshit name? Insulting logic now. Oh yeah, do caveman logic. Brilliant. That is ignorant. Right? What are cavemen? Oh, they're ignorant. And it's not even an intelligent portrayal of caveman, like cavemen actually walked around with big wooden stick. Yeah. Like, wait, you think the Flintstones is true? You think monkeys were inside of cameras chiseling images? I mean, oh yeah, you care about science. But anyway, he's one of these shill assholes. So they'll call themselves shills. They think this whole thing's a fucking goddamn joke. They think this whole idea of pursuing truth is something to laugh about. I mean, they're worse than the flat earthers they're attempting to poorly mock with really pitiful arguments that, like, oh, look at his ugly face. Anyway, wasted on you to actually say something. So the video is full of reasoning, okay? I mean, I point out, do you think a beam splitter creates two equal beams? Could you answer the question, caveman? Do you really think that the radar experiment actually indicates or is showing how photons entangle with each other in space by a wave function? Or is it just showing that you can jam a radio transmitter, receiver? Huh? Asshole? Do you have some evidence that jamming isn't the right answer? Because guess what? The geometry is exactly the same as the wave interference geometry, idiot. Okay, you used a lot of words to say nothing of value. Right, I drew on the board and I asked specific and relevant questions and you didn't touch any of it. Shit for brain. But hey, at least you're not a flat earther as far as I can tell. Oh, isn't that cute? So that's the only subject you give a shit about, right? Everybody else can talk all kinds of shit, and the only ones you're going to pick on are the ones that are the most obviously lying scum, right? I mean, to be a flat earther, you have to be a lying scum, right? Because it's a preposterously idiotic to sit there and pretend that every single person that ever worked on any satellite technology or anything, like my father, you're basically saying, I know your father was a liar. My father wasn't a liar, motherfucker. Okay, he worked for a chemical company that did work in titanium, making the rockets for NASA. You're saying he's a liar. He's not a liar, asshole. Okay, as far as I can tell, so there's some hope for you. Whatever. This is just baby talk. This is the best you can do. This is the best argument you can produce. You have some sort of education, apparently, right? You think you're above it all. You're so much superior to everybody else. This is what an educated person writes. This is crap, fucker. Okay, some hope you'll leave the arrogance of ignorance behind and learn more. I'll make the same argument to you. Why don't you learn something? Why don't you learn what a beam splitter is? Why don't you try to figure out that, your own physics says it's impossible for you to create two equal beams with a half-silvered piece of mirror? Are you so fucking stupid that you can't figure out that a bunch of little specks of silver on the mirror, right? You can't figure out that this space in here where the photon goes through, if the photon goes through here, it goes through here, it goes through here, that it's actually going through a tiny slit, and that the light's going to automatically diffract, and that the light that hits the little piece of silver, oh, no diffraction at all, it just bounces off. You can't understand that one beam through your interferometer is spreading the whole time it's going through the interferometer, and the other beam doesn't spread until the very last foot. The very last foot it spreads. And this would spread the whole damn time. And you're going to tell me that these two beams that have a hugely different profile, one of them is going to be this big, and one of them is going to be this big after it goes through the interferometer. This is what you're going to have. You're going to have one beam that's this size, and you're going to have another beam that's this fucking size. And you're going to tell me, oh yeah, those are equal beams. Is that your theory, you dumb fuck? How about addressing the subject? How is it possible to use a half-silvered mirror and create two equal beams? Why don't you deal with just one of the fucking questions I've asked you? Fucking lazy, stupid dupe. Duper. You must be new here. Well, you're gonna be gone here. Fuck off, Taliban kook. Let's see. Yes, too stupid on YouTube? Question mark. Not too much. Not so much. So I don't. So he talks to the troll, a guy called Taliban. So so clearly a troll, and this is the best he can do. To this channel, the man from the Taliban. To this channel, yes. Too stupid on YouTube? Question mark. Not so much. What the fuck does any of that gibberish even mean? So that's the best you could do, right? I won't block you, but I'm removing your gibberish. You didn't make a counter argument of any kind. You didn't address a single subject brought up in the video. You just pretend there are no arguments. Our theory's indestructible. Look, nobody made an argument against our theory. By pretending you never heard it. Coward. All right. So, I think we're done. So, good. So, till the next time and such, right? There's nothing else here. Oh, yeah, it's Billy Mason reference. Yeah, we already did that nonsense. All right, so, till the next time and such. Sorry for the long video, but lots of good stuff.